the Third Reich collapsed in May 1945, over 100 German submarines were still hidden beneath the oceans. Within days, they began appearing in calm European ports, silent symbols of a war that had finally ended. What followed had never been seen before: entire fleets of submarines seized, examined, and then intentionally sunk. This is the untold story of what became of the U-boats after the Second World War. The order to surface on 8th May 1945. Germany formally accepted total defeat. Almost immediately, Admiral Karl Dönitz, once the architect of the U-boat campaign, and now Hitler's successor, transmitted a final command: every submarine was to halt its mission, rise to the surface, and surrender to the closest Allied force. The battle beneath the seas was finished. From the icy waters of the North Atlantic to the Bay of Biscay and the deep Norwegian fjords, more than 150 U-boats emerged. Their crews, worn and defeated, raised white flags while Allied aircraft watched from above. The U-boats made their way to ports like Loch Erebor in Scotland, Lisahally in Northern Ireland, and Portland along England's southern coast, each docking signalling the quiet end of the Wolfpack menace that had once terrorized Allied convoys. Their surrender was tightly managed. Allied ships escorted the submarines safely into harbor, where Royal Navy and US Navy teams boarded them, seizing codes, charts, and weaponry. Engineers meticulously recorded each rusted, battle-worn vessel, many barely seaworthy after months at sea. At Loch Erebor, nearly 40 U-boats rested side by side. A somber display of defeat. The operation was massive, moving and securing submarines from across Europe, with a few never reaching port. Lost to scuttling or mechanical failures along the way. In the weeks that followed, Allied leaders faced a critical dilemma. What should be done with the world's most sophisticated submarine fleet? Britain and the US saw huge intelligence potential in the revolutionary Type XXI and XXD models, while the Soviet Union, entering the Cold War, demanded its share of the captured technology. Meanwhile, the German crews endured long months in captivity. Some were interrogated for intelligence, especially engineers familiar with advanced engines or torpedo systems. Others remained in camps, uncertain of what lay ahead. By late 1945, most were sent home to a shattered, divided Germany. By year's end, harbours from Trondheim to Portsmouth were packed with captured submarines. What followed? Operation Deadlight would guarantee that nearly all would never sail again. Operation Deadlight and the end of the fleet by autumn 1945. The Allies had gathered more than 100 surrendered U-boats in British ports. Keeping all the captured U-boats afloat was expensive, and there was no way to store them indefinitely. To solve the problem, the Royal Navy launched Operation Deadlight, a plan to tow the submarines into the Atlantic and sink them between November 1945 and February 1946. This quiet operation would wipe most of Kriegsmarine's undersea fleet from existence. The scale was enormous. Of the 156 U-boats that surrendered, 116 were chosen for destruction. The Royal Navy set up 3 sinking zones X, Y, and ZZ, about 100 to 120 nautical miles northwest of Ireland. Here, the submarines would be dispatched using naval gunfire, explosives, or simply by opening their sea valves. The first phase began in November, as tugs towed the captured boats from Scottish and Irish harbours, but the vessels were often in terrible condition. Months at sea without repairs, Allied attacks, and deliberate sabotage had left engines seized, ballast tanks leaking, and hulls weakened by rust. In the stormy winter Atlantic, towing these fragile submarines was perilous. Over a third never reached the scuttling zones. 56 sank en route, victims of rough seas or structural collapse. The Royal Navy documented each loss, but made no effort to recover them. Deadlight was about final destruction, not preservation. Once in position, destroyers and frigates finished the task. Crews used naval gunfire or aerial rockets to send the submarines to the depths. Among them was U-2336, the last U-boat to sink Allied ships in the war, surrendered at Lisahally in June 1945 and deliberately sunk off Ireland in January 1946. Another U-295 went under on the 17th of December 1945 after being towed from Loch Ryan. Not every U-boat was destroyed. The most advanced, the Type XI and XXI, were kept for study. These streamlined, high-endurance submarines represented the future of underwater warfare. British and American engineers examined several, reverse engineering their designs for war fleets. U-2511, Germany's only fully operational Type XI at the war's end, was the final submarine scuttled on 7 February 1946, marking the official conclusion of Operation Deadlight. For decades afterward, the wrecks lay undisturbed on the seabed, silent reminders of a vanished undersea fleet. Then, between 2001 and 2003, maritime archaeologist Inez McCartney led expeditions that rediscovered many of the sunken U-boats. Using sonar and deep-sea cameras, his team located at least 14 intact hulls, resting in the cold Atlantic mud. The discoveries showed just how hurried the Scuttling had been. Many sank upright. Decks still armed, steel now encrusted with coral and the weight of history. Operation Deadlight had achieved its goal. The U-boat fleet was physically gone. Yet it left an unexpected legacy, a sprawling underwater cemetery across the North Atlantic, a silent witness to the final chapter of Germany's submarine war. Transfer, reuse, and Allied service. While most U-boats were destroyed, a handful survived. To the Allies, these submarines were more than relics. They were advanced blueprints with the power to reshape undersea combat. Between 1945 and 1948, dozens were kept, repaired, or shared among the victorious powers, serving as test platforms in the early Cold War. The Tripartite Naval Commission, established in August 1945, oversaw the process, dividing the surrendered fleet between the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. Each received 10 U-boats for study, with the cutting-edge Type XXI and XXI models given top priority. Their sleek hulls, expanded batteries, and snorkel systems marked a revolutionary shift. Submarines built to operate primarily underwater rather than on the surface. In Britain, the Royal Navy used several for testing. U-3017, renamed HMSN-41, underwent submerged trials and endurance runs before being scrapped in 1949. Others, like U-190, surrendered near Newfoundland, were placed in Canadian service, serving as training platforms for sonar and torpedo practice. The Royal Navy also used captured U-boats to perfect depth charge tactics, detonating explosives near real German steel rather than dummy targets. The United States pursued similar studies. Submarines were examined at naval bases in Portsmouth and New London, where crews analyzed propulsion systems, silent running technology, and periscope design. Innovations that would shape America's first post-war submarines. One particularly notable vessel was U-234, a long-range cargo submarine captured on the 14th of May 1945 while en route to Japan with a secret load including uranium oxide and jet engine parts. U.S. engineers studied both its design and cargo before sinking it in weapons tests in 1947. Elsewhere in Europe, other navies received their share. The Soviet Union acquired several advanced Type XI boats, which became direct models for their Whiskey-class submarines. Soviet shipyards dismantled the hulls piece by piece, copying pressure-resistant structures and snorkel systems that gave their fleet a rapid technological leap. To Western powers, this was alarming. The very engineering that had once hunted Allied convoys was now fueling a Cold War arms race under the Arctic ice. Smaller nations benefited as well. France, rebuilding its navy after years of occupation, commissioned a few captured boats, including U-123, which served for several years before decommissioning. Norway used others for training and coastal patrol, while Denmark incorporated German submarine technology into its post-war shipbuilding programs. Yet not all transfers were purely technical. The distribution of U-boats became an early marker of post-war geopolitics. Britain and the US hoped sharing German designs would maintain balance among the Allies. But as the Soviet fleet grew, cooperation quickly turned to competition. The submarines had changed hands, but their strategic importance endured. By the decade's end, most of the retained U-boats had fulfilled their purpose and were deliberately sunk or dismantled. Yet the impact of these submarines lasted long after the war. The innovations of the Type XI, its batteries, hydrodynamic hull, and underwater speed, became the blueprint for nearly every conventional submarine built through the 1950s. In many ways, Germany's last wartime design laid the foundation for the nuclear age beneath the seas. While most U-boats were sunk or scrapped, a few survived, entering a new chapter as artifacts of history rather than instruments of war. Among the best known is U-995, surrendered in May 1945 at Trondheim, Norway. It served briefly in the Norwegian Navy before returning to Germany in 1965. Today it rests at Labo near Kiel as a museum ship beside the Marine, a memorial. Visitors can explore its narrow hull, experiencing the cramped quarters where 45 men once lived and worked under constant strain. In France, captured U-boats also saw post-war service. U-123, renamed Blazon, had a few years of peacetime duty before being preserved in Lorient, one of the Kriegsmarine's former submarine hubs. Other survivors took unusual paths. U-534, raised from the Kattegat Strait in 1993, is displayed in Birkenhead, England, with its hull cut open to reveal the claustrophobic interior. Across the Atlantic, the United States preserved U-505, captured intact in June 1944. After serving as an intelligence prize, it was moved to Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, the first enemy warship ever displayed on American soil. Still, most German submarines never reached museums. The wrecks from Operation Deadlight lie scattered off northwest Ireland, forming one of the world's largest underwater graveyards. For decades they were forgotten, marked only on Royal Navy charts. Public fascination with U-boats continues to grow. Museums in Hamburg, Kiel, and Lebo attract thousands annually, while historians study the tactics, technology, and human lives behind the steel hulls. For veterans and researchers alike, these submarines are more than relics. They are reminders of sacrifice. Over 30,000 German submariners, along with countless Allied sailors, never returned. The machines that once represented stealth and precision now stand for loss, innovation, and memory. Today, the preserved vessels above water and the wrecks below form twin memorials, telling the final story of Germany's submarine fleet. An empire of steel now resting quietly between history and the sea. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you'll also like what happened to Germany's weapons and tanks after World War II. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more History Inside.